Hey everyone, welcome to episode 16 of the Miami Tech Pod. I'm Cesar Fernandez, and I am joined this week by Brian Breslin, Maria Durci, and a very special guest, Michael Sayman. Michael, welcome to the Miami Tech Pod.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And we're gonna get into your amazing career in technology companies and some of the biggest companies in the world in a bit, and your story, but. First, I kind of want to start this episode this week with some really cool news here locally, and something that I've worked on personally, and very proud of my work on it. So I'm going to go into brag mode a little bit, so just indulge here. But for the last couple of years, I've been working with Reef Technologies. Everyone knows Reef; they're a unicorn here, based in Miami. And we've been negotiating with the city to amend their laws here, their ordinances, to allow for mobile food operations for these ghost kitchens, as they're known, or virtual kitchens here in Miami. And yesterday, the city commission voted unanimously 5-0 to authorize these mobile kitchens. Which is really cool because it's the first in the nation. It's the first time that any city has actually changed their ordinances and their laws to make way for this new innovation in tech and food and delivery and whatnot. So just wanted to start with that, get everyone's thoughts, and then we'll go into Michael and his story.
I think first off, congrats, Cesar. You earned your keep. I'm pretty sure Reef is a happy client now, and this will drive more business. And no, I think, and it's interesting to see that the city is finally starting to embrace and understand that it needs to adapt from a policy standpoint to this emerging ecosystem and emerging economy. And I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of helipads you put in these Reef parking lots, or aerial kitchens, or whatever it is that you got up your sleeve next.
This was to your point. This is a really important moment in this year, because we had this question, and we've talked about this in the pod a lot, where even though we have some tremendous champions for the tech community, like Mayor Suarez, we still have relatively antiquated laws on the books. And when the rubber meets the road, will the city actually move quickly and adapt and change regulations in order to be more tech friendly? And I think yesterday we heard a resounding yes from City Hall. All 5 commissioners don't often vote unanimously on items. There's usually a lot of back and forth, and some dissent and differences of opinion. But it was really neat to see, the kind of the city putting its money where its mouth is on tech and innovation yesterday, for sure.
Congrats, Cesar. Like Brian said, this is incredible, and I know you've been working really hard on it. And something I thought you were saying before the podcast started that was really interesting is how you had the kitchen workers themselves kind of speak out on behalf of Reef. And I think that's probably really impactful. And so we'd love for you to kind of share more about what they had to say at this hearing. Yeah,
and huge kudos to the actual public policy team at Reef, Ron Bilbao, Yariel Diaz, Dan Murphy. They, for months, have been just kind of building the campaign, telling the story of, who this impacts, right? And what we saw yesterday is, dozens and dozens of employees from Reef that actually work on the food side of their business, right? This is my livelihood. And there's also some restaurant owners that came out there and said, without Reef, I would not have been able to expand my business, right? Because the only way previous to the virtual kitchen model being deployed by Reef for someone to expand their food operation here, or restaurant, from one side of the town to another, is to just do an expensive build out, get a second location, and all of that. All right. Well, enough about that. Michael, you are with us on the Miami Tech Pod, and the three of us know your story and all of the amazing things that you've done, and you've gotten a lot of like fame and notoriety. But why don't you just share for our audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Hyping me up a lot. Thank you. I appreciate it. I guess the way I would describe what happened to me is it still doesn't feel like it's real. But essentially, when I was a kid, I loved to play this game called Club Penguin, where I would walk around with my little virtual penguin and I would just have fun interacting with other virtual penguins around the world. And I was just playing my game. I loved it. Eventually, I became obsessed with the game, maybe a little unhealthy obsession with this. But my parents, being immigrants from Peru and Bolivia, they didn't know what I was doing on the computer. And I figured they were just like, yeah, well, I guess he's playing the game, so might as well, he's having fun. So they kind of let me continue to brew this obsession that I had with Club Penguin. Eventually, I ended up going into playing this game and thinking, I want to modify the game. I have different ideas for how this game should work that it doesn't work today. And I started learning how to code just because it felt to me like the way that I could change it. I didn't care about coding from any other purpose other than using it as a tool to an end that I wanted to get to. Eventually, I realized I couldn't modify the game because that's not how games work. And I ended up making a blog about Club Penguin. From that, I tried to get people to go into my blog. Nobody would read my blog. Nobody cared about it. I tried to make it look like it was legit. So I would refresh the WordPress blog all the time to get the view count up and make it seem like it had any viewers. I tried making YouTube videos promoting the blog. No one really watched those. I would refresh my YouTube videos to get views on them. And then eventually I thought, well, maybe I should make an app. I remember Steve Jobs did a talk where he was announcing a year after the iPhone came out that there would be an app store and it would be very easy for anybody to make an app. And so I was 12 at the time, and I watched the video and I believed him because I was naive, but also because I was really excited. So I thought, all right, it's easy to make an app. I'm going to go on Google and look how to do it, like I looked up everything else in my life. And I went ahead and I started learning how to make an app. Of course, I didn't know what I was doing. So I would download sample code of apps and I'd run them on my phone. I managed to do that. Then I wanted to change it and tweak it a little bit. So I would grab a random line of code and change it into another random line, and it would break the app and it wouldn't work. And then I would undo that change and then try and change something else and see if that didn't break it. And eventually something didn't break, but rather changed in the way I wanted it to. And a very painstaking process of doing that over and over hundreds of times for dozens of hours a day for many days eventually got to the point where I ended up learning how to code to the ability that I needed in order to get what I wanted built. I didn't know how to do anything that didn't involve what I needed to know to make my app work. But essentially it was a reference guide to Club Penguin. And my thought was, back in the day when you could charge for apps, now everything needs to be free with in-app purchases and subscription models. But back in the day, you could just charge for an app, $2, people would pay. There was no app regarding Club Penguin, no app regarding Pokemon, no app regarding any of these things. So I thought I'll make reference guides to these games, provide all the guides and the tricks to play them. And I'll charge $2 per app. The thing ended up blowing up. I was 13. I put it in the App Store. It cost $100 to put an app on the App Store. And so I asked my mom if she could give me $100. She told me she didn't have the money, but that she would find a way to get the $100 to pay for this. I ended up doing that. And when I ended up paying for the $100 for that whole thing, it ended up just resulting in like the most amazing outcome. I ended up started making like $300 a day right off the bat. It started getting hundreds of sales in the US and Canada, other countries for the apps. My mom couldn't believe what had happened. She told me, if I'm going to give you the $100, don't tell your dad because he can't know about this. He's going to be pissed. And of course, like it ended up working out well in that I want to say the first month when the first check came in of $5,000, my mom thought I had committed a crime. She was like, what did you do? What is this money? Where'd you get it from? And I explained to her the app thing, and she had forgotten about the whole thing from a month prior. It wasn't too important to them. I guess she figured she just lost $100 to a 13-year-old, but it turns out that she made a profit on this. And every month since then, it kept growing. It went from 5,000 to 6,000 to 7,000, 12,000, and kept going from there.
That's really amazing. And you had zero expectations here, right?
Nothing at all. I honestly, well, no, that's not entirely true. I kind of suspected this. I looked at the App Store. I saw what was trending. I looked at the different categories of apps, and I thought, I can't make some of these games. They're too complicated. I wasn't capable. And I looked at other categories of apps, and I thought, well, where can I get to the top charts? Because back in the day, the only way you could discover apps was through the top charts. They didn't really have editorial choices for apps or things like that. It was just the top charts and search. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to make a reference guide, because then I can solve the search issue. I don't have to do my own marketing. Then I thought, okay, well, what top charts can I get into? And I looked at the reference category for apps, and I realized that the reference category had like the least amount of downloads that you needed to get to the top charts. It was a pretty straightforward category. And then on top of that, it was just making a guide. So I only needed to do basic list views and things like that. I didn't need to make an internet connected game or anything more complicated. So that's kind of where that's where I came to the conclusion that it was worth building that type of game.
That's pretty strategic for a 13-year-old at that time. That's incredible.
I was 12 at the time, ended up being 13 at the time that I ended up launching the app. Okay, maybe it was a little strategic, but I also like to think that it was not fully conscious. Like, there were parts of me that could think about this, but when I look back to being 12 or 13, it wasn't like I was articulating these thoughts in that way. So I had them, they were just maybe a little bit different in terms of the wording.
So fast forward, a year or something like that, and you're on the radar of like Mark Zuckerberg, right?
So
right?
Well, essentially what ended up happening was my parents had struggled with the recession, and the restaurant was doing pretty badly. The financial situation wasn't really good in the family. And so I started using the money from the apps that I was working on to end up paying for the bills in the house. And my mom was really kind of the one in charge of the finances at that point, and she would use that to kind of help keep us afloat. So essentially it was like, thanks to the apps that we were working on, that was happening. On the flip side though, the pressure around trying to maintain the situation in the family made it so that all of my life, the fun aspects of this kind of went away, and it became much more about figuring out how to make more money with the apps. And that kind of pressured me into figuring out new strategies for getting new users. And I kind of threw a Hail Mary pass with the last app that I made when I was in middle school, high school, entering high school, with this app called 4Snaps, where it was basically a free-to-play turn-based word game that involved photo taking and whatnot. And I kind of combined the elements of the popular apps at the time and decided that that would probably lead to the most amount of users that I could possibly get. And having that high number of user count would likely lead to getting some type of attribution or like recognition from some tech companies. And that could maybe be my exit, because as I started making these apps, my grades were going down. The stress that I was having with making all of this stuff was really hard. I ended up just getting to the point where like I could not, I couldn't handle it. And I knew this was my only out. There was no other option, right?
You were in high school in Miami at the time, right? Did you grow up in Miami also?
Yeah, I grew up in Miami my whole life. So my parents had a Peruvian chicken restaurant in Kendall, and we basically grew up there. What's
the name of the chicken restaurant?
El Pollón Grill, it was called. El Pollón Grill. And it was amazing. It lasted almost 15 years, which is surprising because a lot of restaurants, they don't really last. And there were periods of time when their business was doing really well. And there were others where it was not. And so it was one of those things that I remember just going back from school, and the normal thing with my sister was we would go to the restaurant and we would sit there and we would just kind of go to the back corner and we'd do our homework. And then we'd wait until 11:30 or 12 when my parents were done with the restaurant and they could close it down, and then we'd go back home. And we would eat there, and that was basically where we would live, right? We would live in that restaurant. So I called it like our second home in many ways, because that was literally where we spent most of our day after school.
Is your family still in the restaurant business or no?
No. So, well, my parents now are 60 and 51. So they've gotten to a point where, it's really hard because for them, you never want to grow up as an adult, have a kid, and then be in a situation where you financially are dependent on like a 14-year-old, right? The family dynamic that results from a situation like that, where the entirety of like the finances of the family depend on a kid who doesn't even know like how to brush his teeth or like make his bed. Like, it's just things like that where you just end up struggling to figure out who is in charge and who makes decisions and how are those decisions made, but then how do you get the kid to make more money, but then how do you not pressure him? So there's a lot of discussions around that end up resulting in really tough psychological challenges. And I think for my parents in particular, it's hard to not feel like you could have done better when you see the situation unfold. No matter how many times I try to explain to my parents, like, this isn't anyone's particular fault. I mean, maybe the recession is due to a couple bad people around in the country, but the 2008 recession is not in the control of my parents or my family. And it's the circumstances that we were given. So ultimately, that's kind of how we try to handle it. After the restaurant ended up closing because it was like in the red for like $4,000 a month towards the end of the business, I basically made the call to close the restaurant down. I tried to tell my mom, like, I don't think we should keep it open. And I was 16, 17 at the time, and we decided to shut it down. Ever since then, we haven't brought it back up. But my mom always has this idea that like, that chicken, if we were to get that Peruvian chicken back up, I'm sure like it would do really well. So we'll see. But given the current times and the way that the, I guess, COVID situation is unfolding, I don't know if they'll ever want to bring that back up, but never say never, right?
Maybe she needs to license some of those recipes to Reef.
Right? Yeah, that's actually a good point. I mean, you never know. And that's where
We're coming full circle here.
Exactly. There's a lot of opportunity in that. And the way I see it is a lot of things that have happened in the past that maybe today we look back on and think, wow, we failed at, or, that was something that I would have done differently. I think eventually we get to a point where we realize that the things that we're learning from those can then start to present new opportunities to us. And that's kind of how I've been, I guess I've been just experiencing, because I think it's just with the passage of time that you learn these things. Yeah.
So Michael, let me ask you. So you built 4Snaps. Was that the one that really took off?
Yeah. So 4Snaps was a struggle because it was an app that people resonated with in terms of user acquisition, but retention and the game itself was not very good, right? But that's okay. Like I didn't mind. It did its job. It wasn't a very long-term retentive product, but for the first time that I built a turn-based game using the internet and a backend service, it wasn't bad. The game ended up getting a couple million users after a few months of promoting it and using Instagram ads. Well, Instagram ads didn't exist, so I started to pay influencers to like promote the app on Vine and Instagram. And as soon as that started to happen, my mom was really worried because she thought this was a free app. You're not getting any money out of it. I had in-app purchases inside of it, but I hadn't really understood how to monetize properly. So it wasn't going as great as I needed it to. And my mom was concerned for me in college in particular. All the money that I had earned as a kid, I think it was like, at that point, I'd earned over $250,000 making apps.
Crazy.
After a couple of years, my mom was telling me that there was none of it left. It was all gone. So I had like $400 left in my account when I made that app, but it did so well, and it got so much attention from some of the media that Zuckerberg actually ended up finding out about it because I did a promotional video for Parse, which is the backend service that runs the app that I had built. And they had recently been acquired by Facebook. All of this was just one of those things of circumstance where you end up doing a video for someone, which I did in my pajamas on like a Thursday night after school, because I was like, all right, I'll just send this video explaining what my app is about, and that'll eventually get somewhere. And then after that, that was it. Zuckerberg found out about it, and he told, I think it was Ilya, who was the founder of Parse at the time, we should hire this kid. And then they forgot about it promptly because, of course, they're very busy. And then 2 weeks later, a recruiter who had overheard that conversation that they had reached out to them and said, hey, you mentioned you wanted to hire the kid. Do you have the email that I can reach out to so we can actually make that happen? And they were like, oh, yeah, that's right. And so they sent that over. And then that's how I ended up in discussions with Mark, and flew me out to meet with him. And my mom joined, and it was really embarrassing. And she tried to point out that we were both Jewish to Zuck, just because she thought like that would be a good. She Googled his name before we went, and that's the first thing she saw. And she was like, all right, I'm going to make sure that he knows that my son is Jewish. I was like, okay, well, we'll see where that goes.
Wow. What a story. And so I think I read this. You were the youngest engineer at Facebook, right?
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy time to have joined at that point and been the youngest engineer. To be honest, I feel like I was like the teen in residence at the company that basically just wandered around and made kind of a mess. But at the same time, I think there was some value to it. I think the company got a lot out of having the context of like a kid running around with his hoverboard and falling on his back and just being a mess, and kind of testing the limits of what the company is willing to accept that I do in terms of behavior, and just even challenging notions at the company. It's just it's an age where you don't follow the rules, not because you don't want to, but because maybe you're not even fully self-aware of what you're doing. And so in many ways, it allowed me to challenge the company, because any other person would feel like, that's insane. What do you do? You're going to get fired, right? I was like, I won't get fired. It'll be okay. Stomp all over everything.
So Facebook was like going away to college for you, right? It was like...
Yes, it very much was like that. It very much was like going away to college, in the sense that like the company felt like a college, to my understanding. But at the same time, it was weird. It wasn't like college in that you weren't surrounded by people in a similar life stage with similar questions, trying to discover things about the world. You were surrounded by people who all had those answers already and went through those experiences. And so all of them have this, very kindly intentioned urge to kind of tell me about what they've already learned, which, in just saying it sounds like the right approach, right? If you want to avoid somebody having to go through the mistakes you do. But when you're in college, there's something about going through the mistakes themselves that kind of helps you learn things in a way that if someone just tells you that and you avoid having to make that mistake, kind of prevents you from understanding. And so there's a lot of elements like that through my entire upbringing at Facebook, I guess, that made it harder for me to understand some concepts. I mean, even the parties didn't involve different types of liquors outside of wines. So I knew about wine, but I didn't know about some of the harder liquors. And whenever I'd go to the bar, I didn't know what to order. And I ended up being 21, 22, never really knowing, right? Never having gone to one of those parties, never having seen my limit there. And so really there's a lot of that made it challenging. But at the same time, I think Facebook, looking back on it, I'm pretty sure they're not going to be hiring another teenager anytime soon. I think they learned their lesson with that one. I'll tell you that.
So, and you built notoriety for being like, oh, that's the teenage engineer, right? Around.
Yeah. So it started like that. Eventually I realized, when I got to Facebook, I thought, okay, everyone's probably in panic here because Snapchat is rising. Nobody's using Facebook. They should be scared. This was 2014, right? I thought, okay, everyone's going to be scared. I got to Facebook and nobody was scared. They all felt like it was fine. And I remember going around and asking other product leaders and saying, hey, what's going on with Snapchat? Like, how are you feeling about that? What are we going to do? And they're like, well, Snapchat's just used by teenagers. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, no one, we have so many more users than they do. We have so many more users than they do. It's never going to be an issue. And we've got some app ideas and they were thinking about Slingshot, and they had a Facebook camera app, and they had a few things that they were testing, but not really going all in on. And I started to kind of try and make the company panic. So I did that twofold. One, I set up meetings with my manager, and I asked him to give me the names of 3 people that he thought I should meet with. And I spent, I want to say, like the first month and a half in my job just meeting people. And I did that recursively. So every person that I met with at the end of the meeting, I asked them to give me the names of 3 people to meet with. It was just to meet everybody at the company. I used that then to my advantage when I created a teen talk at the company, invited everyone that I had met, and started building that up as well as like a newsletter within the company around the teenage demographic. Started handing out quizzes on like pop culture for teens, just to kind of get the company to have to realize that they have no idea what's happening. And then I did an experiment where I unfriended everybody who was older than me on my Facebook page. And then I took a screenshot and a video recording of my Facebook feed, basically dead. And I posted that internally, and that spread throughout the whole company. And eventually I got like a third of the company following all of the teen stuff that I would do. I'd have guests come onto the teen talk show within the company. I do like these big breakdowns of Snapchat and the thread. And we started building out a teens team. And eventually I became a product manager because I wasn't really coding. That grew out into like a team of over 100 people working on teens with data scientists, analysts. And we got to the point where we were meeting with Zuckerberg about how we were going to figure this out, right? And Zuckerberg was the one who gave the team, but it was really because of that push that I had for, we need to do something about Snapchat. And eventually, I mean, we had to pressure Instagram and the people at WhatsApp to build out a stories product. And the challenges around that, I always held a couple of beliefs around what we should or shouldn't do with that. But the details aside, we got it out the door and it worked, right? We were able to kind of, hold off on Snapchat for a bit. And
I'm like picturing Michael standing on a desk in the middle of Facebook HQ with like a megaphone and screaming, "Okay, you freaking boomers. This is what a cell phone it looks like. This is how you open Snapchat, so on and so forth," and doing this like on a weekly basis. That was how I assumed he would teach the olds.
Not at all. We had like these conference rooms that were used for events. I would talk to the new hires and the interns, and it was a similar room. And basically it was live streamed. We had cameras, we had like multiple video panels, and we had like sometimes I'd have guests over, and then we do a Q&A at the end. And it was surprisingly structured for what I think if I were to go back and do now, I'd be a lot more scared to do today than I did then. I would run around in my hoverboard at the new building, and I'd fall on my face, and Zuckerberg is in a meeting in the glass room, and he like sees me fall on my face, and he like doesn't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I just pretend like nothing happened. And then I get like the chief marketing officer and have him ride the hoverboard, and I take a picture of him on it. And then that becomes, so I had a lot of discussions with the comms team, and the PR team and the legal team. They certainly were trying to guide me. And I definitely should have listened more, but yeah. That's the toughest part. Was I don't think I spent years, I want to say maybe 3 or 4, well, the first half of my time at Facebook, I spent like 2 years at the company not even knowing that my problem was that maybe some people weren't catching on to what I was thinking at the same pace. At first, I just thought that they disagreed with me, at which point I tried to like figure out at what point in the logic steps they had broken that up, right? And so, yeah, it was one of those things that I think looking back on, being at the company like that, I'd get pulled into meetings with the whole executive team, and we'd be talking about, okay, well, what do we do about Snapchat and the new Instagram stories rolling out? Like, do we feel we're on the right track? Is there anything there? And I'd just be sitting there like, all right, I guess I'm talking in this. And yeah, I mean, it was weird. It was a weird time, but it was fun. I grew up there.
And you left Facebook in 2017, right? And went to Google?
Yes. So after the whole Instagram stories launch and WhatsApp status and all the stories features had gone out, I was like, all right, time to try something new. I had been under mentorship by a bunch of people at Facebook around how to continue to learn and grow. And you have to look back at yourself maybe a year prior. And if you don't cringe at the thought of what you were like a year prior, then maybe you haven't grown enough. So I thought to myself, all right, maybe this is an opportunity to try something different. I never worked anywhere else before. So I thought, I don't even know what a company is like, a typical company. And a friend of mine who had interviewed at Facebook but taken a job at Google then happened to reach out to me later and said, hey, we're doing some cool stuff at Google. Do you want to come in and join and try out some social products in terms of VR and things like that? And so I thought to myself, all right, I'll take the leap. Why not? Let's try something new. And I talked to my manager at Facebook about it. He thought it would be a good idea to do that as well. And so I ended up doing it. I took the leap. And man, was it different. Google was a very different beast than Facebook. If anything, I wonder if Facebook is currently more like Google, but it was much larger, much more structured, much more like an actual job where people wouldn't talk about what they were doing on the weekend all the time. They didn't follow each other on Facebook. They didn't message each other on Facebook. Like that wasn't a thing. You had a separate work life from the personal life, and there was division between the two. Whereas growing up at Facebook, it felt to me like that was just my personal life. All my friends were the people that I worked with, and there was nothing that really separated the two. And so that was really the opportunity at Google. And I did something similar with Google, where I worked on a lot of experimental products that would then be incorporated into YouTube, into Gmail. YouTube Shorts was something that I was helping out with. And ultimately, I think that's, it's funny because the Google problem with YouTube was, well, how do we attack TikTok, or how do we compete with TikTok? I remember at Facebook, we were monitoring, my team was looking at all of the apps that were up and coming. And we would always keep track of the apps that were slowly creeping up the charts, because the ones that go up too fast are just gonna pop, like Clubhouse. Clubhouse. But we were looking at Musical.ly, and Musical.ly was going up slowly. And I thought, okay, this is a concern. But eventually we got to a point where we realized, no, Musical.ly is not going to be an issue, because Musical.ly is called Musical.ly and it's music. And what that means is, unless they change their name to something that's not Musical.ly, they're never going to grow beyond that. Even though they're super stable. And then of course they got acquired, and then they changed their name to TikTok, and we were like, okay, well, here we go. But yeah, that was the same thing with Google. It was a process of trying to work with them. Eventually I ended up joining Roblox. Actually, it's funny how I got there. I don't know if I can share all the details, but essentially I was looking through, I was hearing a little bit about Roblox here and there, and I realized it was so similar to the Club Penguin world that I grew up in, where kids could make their own games and interact with other players and just build their own thing. And when I realized that, I thought, well, this is interesting. Where are they trying to go? I realized that they were trying to grow really quickly, really fast. And I thought to myself, well, is this going to be a space where I could be useful, right? I had been working at Facebook and Google on social products, and trying to help them build social there. And I knew that they had that as a strength. And then I realized that Roblox was really good at the gaming side, but maybe they could use some help building out more of a social platform, and growing that games. I have a belief that social and games are the same thing. I always like to say, like, Instagram is just a game. It's just a game about life, but it's a game, and we design it like these things are designed like games, right? So really there's no difference. And I thought, okay, well, there's an application for Roblox. There's a use that I could provide. So I reached out, they reached out to me, I reached back, and we ended up having a discussion around the importance of social. They felt like there was a huge opportunity, and I jumped on to help lead social for Roblox.
That's really great. Were you kind of shocked at the IPO? Because I mean, this was like one of the legendary IPOs of the last.
Yeah. I mean, it was. I didn't think
right?
the IPO would go so well, to be honest. But I honestly am very grateful for that. That's crazy. That's turned out the way it has. I'm really excited about that. I think there's a lot of potential, and I think it kind of proves that, like, there's nothing special about the way that I think any one of us thinks about these products, we all generally have a very similar sense of them. And I think the market shows like people see the value in products like Roblox, like they see the future together. And it's just a matter of getting to that. And I mean, yeah. And so now I'm curious to see what happens as we go remote, because for example, right now I'm working remotely for Roblox, but I do see like opportunities of expanding Roblox beyond San Mateo and Silicon Valley, maybe having an office here in Miami. I know a number of us in Roblox are actually working from Miami, so that we have a community of Roblox employees here. I'm very interested in that. I help lead the Latino group for Roblox internally. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Which is perfect for my next question, because it was all about like you being back in Miami. When did you make the move back?
So as soon as COVID hit, my whole life changed. I broke up with my ex. I moved out. No, everything changed.
Now we're getting deep.
Yeah, now we're really getting into. I decided to come back to Florida for a number of reasons. One of them was I just felt like a lot of people in Silicon Valley think the same. And it's not because they choose to think the same. I think it's just when you're somewhere with a group of people for a long time, you're eventually going to merge all your ideas. And every time you go to a meetup and you talk to somebody, they're going to have the exact same opinion as you. We're all just going to pat each other on the back in a big circle, and it's going to be great. We're all going to be happy, and we're going to drive ourselves into a bubble, and we're going to basically have this isolated view of the world that's going to lead us to like not resonating with any users. And then that's how you get disrupted. So I thought, okay, I don't want to be in that bubble anymore. This is my opportunity to leave. So I thought, where is the one place in this country where you go and share your opinion, someone else is going to have a totally different opinion and they're going to yell at you about it. I thought, this is Miami. This is where I should go. And I grew up here, so I was familiar with it. And I thought, I'm going to come here to Florida. And I'm basically going to work remotely until I can convince the companies to let us work more distributed. And so that's essentially what brought me to Miami at the primary, the diversity in thought, the diversity in opinions and ideas that come from that.
It's really cool. What do you think of, everything that's been going on? I mean, obviously this is, as someone that grew up interested in tech, working and building apps, but also left to go work in Silicon Valley, we ask a lot of our guests this question, but was this surprising to you? This big, all of this momentum in tech here?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a little surprising in that I remember I was hearing a few things about Miami early on in COVID, during COVID when it started, and I thought, oh, all right, this is getting interesting. And then it kind of died out for a little bit. I thought, okay, maybe this isn't going to happen. Maybe it's not going to go to Miami. And then all of a sudden it just blew up again with the mayor tweeting out, all the things that the mayor tweets now. And everyone got excited about it because they thought, oh, they got support from the mayor. It's going to be a big deal. And then I started seeing a lot of tweets about Miami. I was like, all right, this is going to be a thing. So I better get down there and see what's going on. And so, I mean, it's surprising to me. What I'm afraid of is that Silicon Valley looks at Miami and treats it like Silicon Valley goes to the beach for a week, or Silicon Valley takes a little vacation time. And what's interesting about that is obviously if Silicon Valley goes to the beach for a week, they don't have to invite the people who work at the beach or who grew up at the beach or who live at the beach. That doesn't matter. They're at the beach for a week or they're at the beach for a season. So that's not really the case. Maybe they're there because they like looking at the beach or they like the palm trees. But the people who work and live there, that doesn't matter, right? So that's my fear. Not because I don't think that's a valid thing to want. Anyone who wants to go to a beach, right? Work from there. But that the community in Miami, I think, can actually provide value to what the interests are of these companies, the diversity of opinions and the demographics and the future that we see in the change in the demographics within this country, with the rise of Hispanic populations growing every single year. My generation is the first generation in US history to be majority Hispanic. That's one of those things that as you start to see the trends change, there's huge benefits to understanding and being around that community. So I hope that they see the value in the community such that we don't end up in a situation where like they just treat it like a beach to hang out at for a couple months.
Yeah, well said, man. We talk a lot about that on this podcast, and I think we're seeing signs of both, if we're honest, right? We're seeing, a lot of companies like signing commercial office-based leases, right? And then we're also seeing, people saying, "Hey, well, yeah, I'm here in Miami for now," right? And it's kind of like TBD, but I think I'd love to get your thoughts on this. My general theory on how to sustain it, and Brian, you've been doing a lot of thinking on this as well, is like just like move fast and build companies, and it'll all like sort itself out, right?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of factors. I think that's certainly one of the most important things that needs to be done. I also think there needs to be a general awareness of this, and I think that's like the sales pitch, right, where Francis has come in with the tweets. I think that's great. I think it's informed a lot of the tech community about it. But when I talk to people in Miami about the tech community moving here, they're kind of out of the loop. It's a totally different group. And so while everyone in Silicon Valley knows that Miami is growing, I don't know if people in Miami know that Silicon Valley is coming, right? And so I think there's an opportunity to maybe get the same level of hype and sales pitch that Francis has been doing to the tech community to come to Miami, but for the people of Miami to like welcome the tech community and to start looking for jobs in that field. I think if we start to hype that up, you'll start to get a lot more college students looking to apply for jobs in tech in Miami, where maybe they wouldn't have looked for it earlier. This is, I think, things that we can do with Univision, with Telemundo. I'm hoping to do, I've got my book coming out in September. I'll do some publicity for that at some point. And when I do that, I hope to use that as an opportunity to get the people of Miami to see that there's an increased opportunity with tech coming into the city, which I think is probably going to be a big component of this, for sure.
Anecdotally, like my sample size is small, unfortunately, but like my students at University of Miami have gone from almost none of them wanted to stay in Miami a year ago. They're all planning on getting out of Dodge and like finding opportunities elsewhere. And now it's like 70-80% of them tell me like that they can't imagine not staying in Miami, and that's such a quick tidal shift, but I think one of the other things that we've talked about on this pod before is that a lot of local folks fear getting either priced out or getting left behind, or that this is like a rising tide that doesn't float their boat, because they have this mindset of that, I don't know how to program, so what use am I in in a tech company, right? But the reality is, like, at a tech company, it's a small percentage of the folks who are actually writing code. There's hundreds and hundreds of other opportunities in these businesses, and like, at least for me, I think that this is going to be a net positive for the community.
I agree. I very much agree. I do think that, for example, there's events where I'll hear them ask here in the tech events here in Miami, they'll ask like, raise your hand if, how many of you have moved here in the last 6 months? And everyone raises their hand and it's like, wow, like that's amazing. I want to see a question be asked, how many people here, how many people attending here have lived here for longer than 6 months? And watch nobody raise their hand and everyone be like, oh, wait, maybe this is an issue, right? Because I think there's a benefit to talking about how many people have migrated. But the fact that these events don't include people that have been here longer than 6 months concerns me. And you bet if I'm going to be at any event, I'll be asking a question like that, and we'll see how it goes. So I think there's an opportunity for a lot of us that stand in between the tech community in Miami to kind of use that ability that we have to really kind of highlight that and put a little bit of pressure on the new folks. And it's fine. Like, they love Miami. They're going to come, right? But maybe they can use a little bit of pressure.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much for joining us on the pod. This was a really, really great conversation. I had a lot of fun chatting with you about this. You've had an amazing career. Congratulations for that. And I look forward to, two things. One, seeing what's next for you, right? And all of the things that you're going to focus your energy on. But feel free to come back and promote that book. Later.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to. There's a whole lot of details in that regarding Zuckerberg and my personal life and the disaster that was my home that we talked a little bit about. So I'm sure at some point I'm more than happy to come back and share some more. But I appreciate it, and this was great.
Awesome. This wraps up episode 16 of the Miami Tech Pod. Once again, thank you, Michael, for joining. Thanks to everyone who's been. We've had this huge surge in Twitter followers, so thanks for following our updates on Twitter. Make sure to like and subscribe to the pod and tell your friends. But thank you. We'll see you on episode 17.